Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted this week to have an entrepreneur and someone who has thrown himself wholeheartedly into the whole recruitment and investment world. And I've found it fascinating working with him. It's a real privilege to have him on. Without further ado, I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, Jonathan. Great to be here. My name's Jamie Woods. I'm the founder and chief executive of JCW Group. We're a recruitment company. I set this business up back in my apartment in 2007 as a one-man band. I've grown it to where we are now, which is a much bigger organization spread across 5 offices in Europe and the US. And more latterly, I'm also founder and chief executive of a company called Search Capital, which is a human capital investment business. And basically, we buy and fund organizations of various different sizes within the world of human capital, and that's all over the world. We've got 5 portfolio companies at the moment. Throw all these different businesses together, we've got about 300 people, 7 offices, and are looking to grow fairly substantially this year as well.
Well, it's a fantastic time for you, Jamie, and there's sort of lots of stretch and growth, and you've had a lot of success, for which I congratulate you. And even if you haven't had success every year, you're always learning from what goes on, which is what makes an inspiring leader. And Jamie, in your experience, who have you found to be an inspiring leader? And how would you define it to you, the qualities of someone you found inspiring?
I think, so reflecting on inspiring leadership, I think it boils down to two different things for me. So crucially, you need the actual success there. So having someone who's a super inspirational individual but doesn't actually correlate with results doesn't ultimately, for me at least, translate to inspiring leadership. You need success, a consistent track record of success. It's never going to be continuous 100% success, but you want someone who wins more than they loses over a period of time, and they've got the t-shirt on that front. And I think also crucially for me, it needs to be, because doing the work that I've done as a recruiter for quite a long time now, you get to meet a lot of people. You get to meet a lot of leaders across all sorts of different industries with all sorts of different backgrounds. And I think to be inspirational, you don't just need someone who's got that track record of success. You need someone who's done it in an environment which has actually required the ability to motivate, to lead, and to build effective teams. And interestingly, that's not always the case with some industries out there. In my experience, in some industries, you can be very successful, but you can also be a terrible leader at the same time. You might be successful because you've got a particularly great idea that's attracted lots of funding, or you might have loads of capital and you're really good at striking deals, for example. But to me, to be a proper inspirational leader, you need to be someone who's got the success coupled with a real strong ability to motivate others, to build harmonious teams, to keep people together for the long term, to build towards a common goal.
Yeah, I really agree with that. It made me think about a number of situations. One is obviously with some of the politicians we've got at the moment around the world, where we go, but they're appalling leaders, but they happen to be in charge of your country. How did they get there? You get the politicians you deserve, someone said, and I think we've been cruelly let down by what people feel we deserve. But then the other thought was, I thought of a time where I had a Russian who was working in investment banking. He found me out and came and asked me to coach him. And before we began, I was just doing some discussion with him. And he described his bosses in this very famous investment bank. And I said, sounds like they're white-collar psychopaths. And he goes, really? And I said, here's the list. And he looked through the list and he went, yes. He said, can you teach me? And I said, of course, I'll teach you how to avoid these kind of people, how to really keep away from them. No, he said, I want to be like them. I go, no, that's not what I do. And I showed him the door. I found someone else who had a different way of doing things. He was happy to help him, but I was not going to do that. And so, yeah, you're right. They may be successful. Doesn't make them necessarily a good leader. Just like that saying, all leaders are readers, but not all readers are leaders. Because I think you like reading as much as I do.
Yeah.
Your life journey, your life journey defines you. There you were, 2007, starting up a business, and here we are, just a few years later. with considerable success. So where did it come from? You know, what were the people who brought you up like, and maybe your grandparents? What kind of culture was there, and was there this drive for success? Tell us a bit about your life, really, Jamie.
Yeah. So like, to be honest, I've had a I've had a fairly privileged life. I was born in Surrey, raised in London till I was about 7. Then my parents moved over to Devon, so I kind of grew up in the country from ages 7 through to 18. Only child, very sort of stable household. And then I left I left Devon at 18 to go to university in London, and basically have effectively stayed in London ever since. I mean, I've been asked this question a few times as far as, you know, what was it in my upbringing that led me to sort of do what I ended up doing career-wise. I don't really have an answer, to be honest. There isn't like a key formative moment that I can point to, where it was sort of a before and after moment. I think, you know, something that definitely happened, that I credit my parents for, is they somehow raised me to be a very confident person. And I've read before that that's a trait that you do sometimes get in only children. So I don't know if that necessarily helps, but I don't know how, but they raised me to be a very confident person. You know, it was never really acceptable to talk in any way that was sort of talking myself down at all. You know, it was always drummed into me that I could basically achieve anything I wanted to achieve. You know, the world wasn't against me at all. The world was there for the taking. And I just had this very high level of confidence for kind of as long as I can remember, certainly from sort of adolescence onwards. And, you know, that clearly fed into, you know, life in business, you know, had a real big impact and allowed me to make some fairly, you know, some of the decisions I look back on, for example, the decision to set up a business in recruitment with actually only 2 years experience. So I set JCW up when I was 24. You know, looking back on that, it was bonkers. You know, really, like there was clearly an outrageous level of confidence there at a fairly young age. And, you know, it all obviously worked out for the best, but still I can look back fairly clear-eyed now and realize what a slightly crazy decision that was. So I don't know, I couldn't really bottle it as far as how I was brought up in that way, but there was clearly something in the way I was raised which, you know, gave me a slightly unusual level of confidence.
Yeah, and what was it both your parents did? I mean, when they were in Devon and in London, what kind of careers had they had?
So they were both actually. So in London, my mum was a secretary and my dad was worked for Shell as a surveyor. So he was responsible for buying land for Shell. So if they needed a new petrol station in an area or something like that, he'd go and scope out whether they should pay a certain amount of pounds per square foot or something like that. So you know, I think we're different people, my parents and I. So, you know, I don't think either of them had quite the obsession with work that I would say I probably do. And also, you know, when we moved to Devon because my dad had retired. He retired early. So again, from 7 to 18, it wasn't as if I was there like observing my parents working hard or doing a business or anything like that. So like, yeah, I had a great childhood. You know, and I'd say an idyllic childhood as well, because we grew up right in the middle of nowhere, right in the countryside. But it wasn't like a classic entrepreneurial childhood where I'm observing all this sort of business goings on and workings and all the rest of it. It wasn't like that at all.
No, well, the nice thing is that there is, from my experience with all the entrepreneurs, there's no classic. There is certain things that influence certain people. But what about grandparents? Anything about in the grandparents that you ever saw as you were brought up?
No, to be honest, no, because I didn't know. I never met my my grandfather on my dad's side. I only knew my grandmother on my dad's side till I was about 8 or something. And my grandfather on my mum's side, I only knew him till I was, I think, 4 or 5. And I knew I knew my nan's side on my mum's side for quite a bit longer. I think she died when I was 18 or something. But you know, she was a great nan for the most part, but not someone that I can necessarily tie any real character traits to.
Yeah,
Being completely honest.
Okay. No, thank you for that. And then stepping back from it all, looking at learnings from a proudest moment, a happiest moment in your life thus far, and also from a dark moment in your personal life or work. What did you learn from each of those? What did they teach you?
So interestingly, when we talk about proudest moments, my brain doesn't really work like that. I get asked fairly frequently, like whether I feel proud about, you know, something. And yeah, my brain doesn't really work like that. It's not as if I'm walking around, you know, with a sort of persistent state of self-loathing or anything like that. You know, I can be content in my achievements. I can be proud of having achieved something. But you know, whenever I've achieved anything, let's say I had a particularly strong performance in business or something like that, you know, I'm acutely aware of all the different things that I could have done better. I'm very much aware of other people out there who've done better, who have been more successful, done it quicker, or done it with more finesse or whatever. And I never really, I don't know if my brain almost equates too much pride with a sense of sort of resting on my laurels. And I think if I don't know. I think that's one of the reasons why I probably got a lot of drive, is that I just don't never really sit down and sit there and feel particularly proud of myself. As far as Dartmouth, I mean, I think anyone who builds anything of any kind of scale has gone through plenty of ups and downs and can point to all sorts of mistakes made and you know, lessons learned. I think for me, there is a real formative dark period in, I always forget the exact year. It's either the beginning of 2017 or the end of 2017 or the end of 2016. But long story short, I had this awful Christmas where we sailed pretty close to the wind as a business, and you know, effectively it almost came crashing down. And I think the reality of the situation became clear going into Christmas. So I basically had to spend the 2 weeks of Christmas like completely immersed in spreadsheets trying to work what's going on. And I remember like it was yesterday, the sort of feeling of dread, basically, that after all this work that had been put into it, that everything could be coming crashing down and it could all be for nothing. And what had basically happened is we'd gone from a business where in the first sort of 5-6 years were, yeah, exceptional performance, winning awards, everyone's superly happy, you know, great financial situation. And then almost walked over the following few years into a state where I'd become quite accepting of like very mediocre, if not bad performance, you know, over a period of time, you know, nothing sudden. And then finding myself in this situation, you know, whenever it was, or actually the state of the business was basically unsustainable. And yeah, that feeling of terror, it was kind of a good thing, because you know, it woke me up and I came back in January, made some changes in the business, significantly increased expectations across the board, and basically since then we've never looked back. Like, it was a real transfer. It was a transformational moment, not just for me, but for the organization as well. And I think one of the reasons why it was such a pivotal moment is I do still remember now that feeling, you know, how bad that feeling was, that everything that you've worked towards is potentially going to end up effectively for nothing. And it's a very useful lesson to have learned, because when you find yourself sometimes slipping in terms of the expectations you have, or the kind of standards that you're applying to the business, remembering what the potential consequences are if you're not setting your expectations high enough. I do remember that ever so clearly, and it's it's definitely the clear sort of formative dark moment I could point to that still plays out today.
Yeah, it is interesting that many entrepreneurs and leaders often have that sense of dread and things that they're chased by, the demons they're chased by, which push them on for higher and higher performance. And I know at times when I've looked back in my own performance and what I've done, there has been that element of not wishing to fail, but wanting to succeed. It's a sort of away from and towards kind of drivers.
Yeah. I think sometimes as well with success, it's quite easy to sort of start to believe in your own invulnerability, or that you're somehow ordained to get to where it is that you're heading. And so, yeah, I think for me, that was a very important lesson, that actually you can't take anything for granted.
Yeah.
Just because you think you deserve something, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. No,
and it can all come crashing down.
A very healthy kind of reality check in with yourself. So that's a great bit of advice for all of us and for entrepreneurs and business people going forward. But also, Jamie, you talked about starting your own business when you were 24 back in 2007. But if you went back to see yourself as a 16-year-old or 18-year-old, that kind of period of quite significant step in people's lives, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself about what mattered and what didn't matter?
I think it's if I look at all the different skills that I had kind of on day one versus the skills that I needed as my career went on that I maybe didn't have. I think probably the one skill that took me longer than it should have done to develop, but had a big impact on how successful I ended up being, was sort of organization and time management. I just, it fundamentally boils down to discipline, and discipline is something that, I'm now pretty good at. But I think, if I look back, if I'd really lent on myself at that young age about, how important, organization and diligence is on actually being productive. Because what I found is the early few years of my career, I had an impeccable work ethic. So I was working all the hours under the sun, and I had a good approach to quality. So like the quality of my work was continually improving, and those two things combined led to a positive result. But what I didn't really have, I didn't have great organizational discipline. So my productivity wasn't quite as high as it could be. And being completely honest, I probably only really got good at this about 4 or 5 years ago, as the business got more and more complex, and it just became completely untenable to be anything other than well organized. But I think if I look back, if there was some kind of intensive education I could have gone through when I was younger, then I think that could have had a potential fairly substantial impact on things.
Yeah, and also many of the entrepreneurs and leaders listening are having to balance work and life. And I'm talking to you, you're in I think a nice hotel in Texas, but you're about to go into Los Angeles as you fly around the global business. But also, if I'm right, recently you have another addition to the family, and that also puts extra strain. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I've had I've got 2 daughters. I've got one 9-year-old and one 6-month-old. And yeah, I guess I like most parents, if not all parents, like being a high quality parent is pretty much top of the list in terms of priorities. Not always a priority that goes hand in hand with business success or career success. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to juggle it. You need to make a lot of time. And I don't really. I'm not I think I do well at it. I'm not the expert, and it's very difficult, especially with my inclinations in work ethic. Like I generally always want to be working more and more in order to tackle a particular problem. But at the same time, that completely clashes with, I always want to spend more and more time with my daughters as well. It's tough, and to be fair, that's another thing that factors into the whole organization thing. Like, you need to be very effectively organized if you want to walk and chew gum at the same time. For example, build a business and also be like a present and positive parent as well. Tough, but very much doable though. Very much doable in my experience. I don't think it's a choice you have to make, at least not as a man.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people look back and go, success is getting what you want, but happiness is wanting what you already have. And I think a lot of people have a lot of things that others would love to have, but they never kind of value it enough, or are present enough with those people, whether it be children or partners, or other family members, until they've gone. They read. I mean, I think of my brother David, who died last year, and we had many conversations, but I could have spent more time with him. And suddenly within 10 weeks from diagnosis of cancer to death, he was gone. And I only had the chance to visit him once before he died. And it's often late in life, we realize that some of the things, How Will You Measure Your Life, is a very good book by, forgot the guy's name, but Christensen is the surname. And it's well worth a read. He was a Harvard professor as he was coming to the end of his life, looking back over how are you going to measure it. Thinking about lives, if there's one thing you could change in your life and you could live it again, what would you change? Or you've mentioned a crucible moment when you had that fear and dread of the business was slowly drifting over a cliff if you didn't do something about it. But if there's anything you could change, would you change anything, Jamie?
It's a bit of a cliche answer maybe, but no, I wouldn't. Like, look back on life, there's countless mistakes, errors, regrets. I think when people look back and say they've got absolutely no regrets in life, then I think I would wonder to what extent they're actually learning from the mistakes that they've made. So countless mistakes made, but also very, very much recognize that those mistakes have basically made me who I am today and strengthened me considerably. So if I'm a quite reflective person, so I'm definitely think you need to look back, and when things go wrong, you need to understand why they went wrong and what your part of it was, and learning accordingly. But if you apply that consistently year on year to your the way your brain works, then you kind of realize that actually every time you make a mistake, it ends up being a positive thing. You might prefer it not happen. You might have maybe done things differently with your time again, but at the same time, it has made you a stronger person today. It's made you more effective. If you're thinking in pure business terms, it makes you a more effective person. Think in personal terms, it might make you a nicer person, learning through the mistakes that you've made. So no, wouldn't change anything.
It is interesting that the mistakes I think I've made over the time, and I've made so many of them, sometimes through poor judgment. And of course, my judgment's been improved by experiences that I've had. Sometimes it's maybe a bit more cautious and reticent about things. I remember being stung in a big sting operation by a woman from Australia who I think she robbed about 42 of us in the whole property field, and she came across as very persuasive, but she was a psychopath, and she went to jail in the end. I helped to put her in jail behind bars because she robbed so much money from us by promises of things that were never going to happen. Buying property off plan that were going to go massively up, and all the people you then meet, they're then corrupt as well. It's almost like a feeding frenzy by sharks when they realize you've got gullible people who are too trusting. So I think at times it can make you a little bit all hoarier and more bitter, that you don't get stung so much, and you don't kind of believe everything that you hear. You want to do a bit more due diligence. And I sense for you and other entrepreneurs that you have to be pretty hard-arsed, and you have to have some courageous conversations, difficult conversations with people, because you're not running a charity. And indeed, my wife does run a charity. And even in running a charity, you've got to be careful that you don't get taken for granted, that people think they can just show up and you pay them as, to do the work they do, but they won't really deliver anything. So I think back to your point on success and consistent record and motivation and leading and building, and it's very relevant. Let's go on to moral quotient, MQ. We're going to go around the Inspiring Leadership Compass, beginning with your values, your beliefs, and what you learned when you slipped up. You had a set of values and beliefs, but you let it slide, and it wasn't good. How did you get yourself back on track, and what advice would you give others when they let their values slide and they don't stick to what they said they were going to do?
Yeah. So for me, this is something that is organic. So it changes with time. I think if you spoke to me, 3 or 4 years ago, I'd give you maybe a different set of values to what I'd give today. And I'd imagine in another 3 or 4 years time, I'll give you another set of values as well. I think my values change with experience. So all those mistakes that we talked about, all those sort of lessons learned. They change with circumstance, what you actually need to be achieving. It changes with goals to a certain extent. There tends to be like a consistent vein running through them. But I tend to do an exercise, a couple of times a year, where I actually sit down and I'll write what I perceive my values to be, and analyze them, and do they make sense? What else should I be putting them in, and to what extent are they actually really being applied to the way I go about making decisions and the way I go about treating people? I think, if I talk about my values now, honesty is a clear one. I mean, honesty is maybe not the right word, because it almost implies just not being dishonest, which isn't really what I'm talking about. I think it's being very candid with people in terms of what they're doing, what your expectations are of them, how they're meeting up with those expectations. And that refers back to the need to have lots of difficult discussions, like you just mentioned. Going down the investment route, like I have been, it requires that very frequently, like an incredible amount of clarity that you need to give people in terms of what the expectations are, and the extent to which they're matching it. So that honesty is, and also at the same time, it's encouraging that same level of candor in reverse, which I think is, key to really growing to a certain level as a leader, if you're actually building teams around you that are giving you real honesty in their opinion of things, which, for the record, I think is actually also very difficult to do. Drive's a big one. I think drive's one that's probably been in there since day one. Actually, if you'd have asked me this question 10 years ago, it'd have definitely been in there. It's a bit of an internet cliche now, but sort of being the hardest worker in the room has always been something that it's been a value that I've signed up to. I find it a very triggering comment when people say things like, I like to work smart, not hard. I don't really understand why those are two mutually exclusive things, and why you can't just do the two of them together. So work ethic is definitely a fundamental part of my value set. And I think something that's come to the fore more recently is, I guess you could call it focus. And that's partly focus, day-to-day focus, to make sure that, doing things in a productive fashion. But I think it's more importantly strategic focus, as in making sure there is a strategic focus in pretty much everything I'm doing business-wise. Why are we at this meeting? Why are we doing this project? What are we aiming for as a business? Making sure that we actually are clear in the direction, what we're about, and then making sure that that strategic focus is actually communicated to the wider organization, so everyone knows what direction they're going in. And that's something that was very much missing. If I look through my previous dark time example that I gave, that really was what got lost in those sort of few years of underwhelming performance. Just I wasn't providing that strategic focus of where we wanted to be and what we're about. So I think it's those few things now, but it will change.
Yeah, and it triggers nicely with I suppose my upbringing in the military. We always talked about the German approach, the main effort, the Schwerpunkt, where you're putting your best resources and people, and that was going to break through. That was where the business was going to succeed. Your secondary and your tertiary effort. And when your main effort is blocked, how you quickly switch your main effort, that the second or the third one becomes the main effort, you reprioritize, but that's where you break through. And that links to Essentialism by Greg McKeown, a very simple, easy to listen to audiobook or book, which is about this idea of what you say no to. So you're very focused on what you are going to be known for. I do relate to that. And then thinking about hard workers, I agree with you up to a point, and I think Rommel got it right, though in his day he was brutal because it was wartime. But he said there's 4 types of leaders. There's the there's the stupid and hardworking leader. There's the stupid hardworking. I'm being stupid now. There's the bright and hardworking. There's the stupid and lazy, and there's the bright and lazy. And he said you want to take the stupid but hardworking leaders and shoot them. They're a liability. They'll take you miles in the wrong direction, working very hard, but they're stupid and they've got the wrong things and the wrong priorities, and they're just taking your business and your troops to ruin. And then you take the lazy, and I think lazy is the wrong term, but maybe selective but bright officers, and you promote them to the highest ranks because they'll get things done and they get the right things done. I think that's been taken to extremists by people with no morals, like Boris, who thinks he can be terribly clever and very idle and succeed. But I'm thinking as well. I'm sure your success. I've met some of the members of JCW. You've had a talent for spotting bright and hardworking people, and you've got them on your team. So you haven't been doing, and as you've gone on, Jamie, you've stepped back and got more strategic and got others to do bits you don't do, because if you're doing it all yourself, you are a limiting factor on your business. And I don't think you've acknowledged quite, I haven't heard you speak of it yet, but you do have a knack for finding good people. When you were 24 and you had, a small business, you wouldn't have succeeded unless you'd gone out there and not only found good clients, recruit good clients, but recruit good people who could recruit good clients. Don't you think?
Yeah. Completely. And if I look at the people that I've hired in the business over the years, like a lot of these people have developed into being, genuine business partners, which was always the intention of this organization when I set it up. I think identifying good people, I don't know if I've necessarily got a particular talent for identifying people when they come off the street as to whether they're going to be good or not. That's actually, as someone who's interviewed thousands of people and facilitated thousands more of interviews across clients and stuff, that's actually a very difficult thing to do, to really establish if someone's really going to be the long-term fit. Especially, our JCW's main strategy hiring wise is we hire trainees pretty much straight out of university. So they could be an excellent candidate, but no matter what they say, they don't really know themselves particularly well yet. They don't know really what motivates them, what demotivates them. So it's very much a bit of a lucky dip as to whether it works. I think identifying talent to sort of pick the winners is actually very challenging. But what we've done a good job at, and I guess what I've done a good job at specifically is create an environment where when you do get it right, when you do bring the right person on board, that your chances of developing them into a long-term success are maximized, and your chances of them actually staying with the organization long-term are maximized. And I mean, there's a few that got, if I think about the amount of work that I put into the business in terms of thinking about how to do things, I mean, so much of it over the last sort of 15 odd years now has been focused on, right, how can we create that environment which does those two things, makes people as good as they possibly can be, whether that's you're just talking about developing a salesperson when they first join a business, or whether we're talking about developing someone who can run a 100-person office somewhere effectively, and also making sure you've got an environment where those people never want to leave. And the latter is very difficult to do in a recruitment environment, because it's a very low barrier to entry environment. So it's very easy for someone just to walk out the door into another firm for an extra bit of money, or even to walk out the door and set up their own business somewhere, much like I did. So you need to provide a very compelling offering to stop that happening. And also, crucially in recruitment, all you actually have is your people. So if all your people walked out the next day, all your business has gone with them, because all your client relationships and all the rest of it effectively go up in smoke. So it's a very high pressure environment where you need to create that kind of cultural binding, where you're developing people, but also keeping them in the organization, keeping them retained and happy.
Yeah, I think that is so important, and so many firms are samey. They're all the same as each other. So what is it that makes them stay? And I think where you've got a place where there is psychological safety, where there is a sense of camaraderie, where they feel they're being developed, I think that makes a huge difference. On to the next one round the Inspiring Leadership Compass, PQ, meaning and purpose quotient. Why do you do what you do, Jamie? You know, what's your calling in your vocation life? You know, you've been a founder and the group CEO of a very successful recruitment global business. Now you've also been the founder of a search capital business as well. So the group's expanded. You know, why do you do both those things? What is it? What's the drive for you?
So, right, if you'd have asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have just said money. You know, that was all that I thought I was really there to do it for. You know, I was obsessed with buying a Lamborghini, which I had been pretty much obsessed with for as long as I can remember, since I was sort of 5 years old, with a little Micro Machines Lamborghini I used to play with. And that was like the financial motivation was the key driver. At least that's what I thought it was. And then as the business got more successful, I realized fairly quickly that it wasn't really money that got me motivated. Money was more of a nice byproduct of the things that motivated me. And if I look at where I really get enjoyment right now, a couple of contradictory things. I mean, like most people, it's very enjoyable, very fulfilling when business is going great. You know, when everything's going well, it all feels a bit easy. You don't have any kind of massive issues that you're dealing with, and everything's flying. That's naturally quite fulfilling. But I think where I also get real enjoyment professionally is when we're going through a really difficult period, you know, and you're really having to do some sort of swashbuckling in business terms, you know, whether that's dealing with a particularly meaty problem, or even like dealing with a substantial downturn or some huge error that's been made in the business or something like it. You know, it's the super stressful, high pressure, distressed scenarios, which is probably where I get my most fulfillment. You know, a good example is Q2 2020, when the world is falling apart, with COVID wise. Like, it was an incredible stressful situation for everyone, and like obviously a massive human cost. But from a business perspective, it's probably one of the most motivating times for me, where you've got all these people that are relying on you for their well-being, and you know, their income, and all their families that are relying on you as a result, and the need to sort of step up and provide effective leadership in those times, I think is much greater than, you know, in the good times when everything's going well and everyone's happy. So yeah. I think it's a mixture of those two things.
Yeah. And how old are you now, Jamie, if you're happy to share?
40.
Yeah, okay.
Turned 40 a couple of months ago.
Yeah, well, congratulations for your birthday recently. And aside from the occasional niggling injury, you've kept yourself extremely fit and healthy. How important is mental health and physical health to you? And what tips would you give to other would-be entrepreneurs and successful leaders?
So I think the two are intertwined. I don't think it's like, I think the positive impact that physical health has on mental health has been like massively documented already. I'd be surprised if many of your listeners weren't already aware of the connection. You know, I'm quite fortunate. I got hooked on exercise, I think, when I was about 20, 21, and I've never really looked back. And like, yeah, aside from the occasional niggling injury, I've got the discipline required to get up every day and basically do something. And that's largely because I have observed how positive an impact it has on my mental state. I think, yeah, I'm blessed with like a relatively level, what's the word? Level mindset. Don't get outrageously emotional either way, like in downturns or upturns. Like I'm relatively stable. And I think that probably makes it a bit easier for me to sort of manage my mental state. But I think something that works quite well for me is I write a lot in various different ways. So I've got a habit at the moment where I write down my problems every week. They're mainly business problems, but you don't have to just be business problems. What's playing on my mind right now, and what can I maybe do to impact those problems on the week ahead. I think getting that on paper is pretty useful. I do a reasonable amount of journaling as well. So not every single day, but I'll say a couple of days a week, I put pen to paper and, write down thoughts, feelings, observations, ideas. I find that's quite cathartic. And I'm a big goal setter. So I'm always setting goals, quarterly, weekly, annually, life, all sorts of things. And I find that very useful to, especially in a situation where you're feeling you're a bit stressed and things are piling up on you on a bit, to sort of remind yourself, actually, what am I doing here? Where am I getting to? What are the good times are going to look like? But yeah, I've got various little rituals like that, which I think they're largely there just to keep, my mental well-being on the straight and narrow.
Yeah. And it is, goal setting is very important. I'm looking at my 2023, 2024 milestone priorities and in which order I see things, with actually Lee and my relationship with her first, then the children, then fitness and health, then some of my key clients, and then the podcasts, and then winning new clients. But those aren't specifically goals. They're more a priority of how I'm going to focus on things. But it's interesting about goal obsession. We've got to be careful of that. There's the sort of, it's a spectrum, isn't it? And just like we've seen on Into Thin Air, on the Everest crisis of so many people dying, that you can be so obsessed about the goal of getting to the summit that you forget it's only halfway there. You've got to turn around and come back down again alive. And so I think I do come across leaders who are so obsessed on that they forget that everything in life is possible if you're prepared to pay the price and live with the consequences. And sometimes the price and the consequences are too high, whether it be marriage, relationship failure, impact on children who don't know their mother or their father, whatever it might be. So it's a fine balance, which then needs emotional intelligence, which is the next question I have for you, Jamie. EQ, emotional and social intelligence. This is something we all need to work on, and certainly very goal-obsessed entrepreneurs that I know sometimes have high IQ, but then maybe not reading their impact on other people or picking up the environment so much, or managing their own emotions because they're so driven. How have you developed your emotional intelligence, and what do you do when you let it slip?
So I actually think if I look at my career, there's a couple of skills that kind of from day one I was pretty good at for one reason or another, and I'd say emotional intelligence is one of them. And I think when I don't know the proper dictionary definition of it, but when I think about emotional intelligence, I'm thinking about someone's ability to understand how their words might play out in another person's head, to understand what someone's emotional response is going to be to, events or words or stimuli and all the rest of it. And that's something that I think I've been pretty good at from day one as a manager. And it's something that I think developing it, because whilst it's something that I've found relatively comfortable for pretty much all of my career, it's something that as an organization we've had to look at very keenly, because there's something like 300 people across the business at the moment, so you need lots of managers for those people to be managed, and those managers are largely managing salespeople, which in itself is a particularly difficult task. And I know from experience that you can have a manager who is excellent in all ways, but if their emotional intelligence is relatively low, then we're going to get difficulties. We're going to get difficulties fairly quickly, no matter how good they are at everything else. So there's been a lot of time and effort spent on our part as an organization as to how do we develop emotional intelligence in people that maybe start off slightly less confident on that front. And being completely honest with you, we don't have the answers there. Yeah, I find it very difficult to improve it. I've seen it. We've been successful in it in a few times over lengthy periods of time, where you're giving people examples of where they perhaps didn't operate in a particularly emotionally intelligent way, and you have seen people improve, but it's a very slow going thing. I think if I looking back at my own EQ though, I think one element that probably falls under this, which I think is I guess it's been of interest to me more recently is listening, like the ability to listen to others. And so we as an organization, we take well-being and mental health very seriously. It's a key part of our purpose to really make a substantial impact in that space globally. And as part of that, we train up various mental health first aiders across the business. And I myself went through a mental health first aid course a couple of months ago. And as part of that course, there was a listening exercise that we had to undertake where, the context being, I basically had to sit there, listen to someone as someone was talking to me about their problems, and basically just listen. So you can ask the occasional question to find out more, but you can't interrupt, you can't give them your opinion or try and help. You've just got to listen. And I actually found it incredibly difficult. Really difficult. I did well in the context of the exercise because I knew I was getting observed, but found it a real struggle. And then when I took that training and applied it to my business life in a completely non-mental health related basis, just when anyone was coming to me with any kind of a problem, all of a sudden I realized that I'm not really that used to listening, especially when you're doing a senior role and people are coming to you with their problems very frequently, and it's kind of your job to help them solve those problems. That doesn't always go hand in hand with good listening. Someone starts talking, you've already kind of calculated what they're going to say, you've already calculated what your advice is going to be, and you're kind of just politely waiting for them to finish, for you to then sort of give those pearls of wisdom and then move on to the next problem. And then when I found that listening exercise very enlightening, specifically in my experiences in the sort of days and weeks that followed, when you start to realize actually, you may think you've got certain things on lock in terms of emotional quotient, but actually there's still a long way to go for some of them. And I think that listening is still something I'm working on.
Jamie, I think we'll be doing it all our lives, and crikey, it's my job as a broadcaster to listen and hear and pick things up. But you have to be very careful that you're not listening to respond. You're listening to ignite their thinking. And Nancy Klein's work and her book, The Promise That Changes Everything, I Won't Interrupt You, is a very profound listen for those who want to do. And they say that we listen at 5 levels: to ourselves, to the content, to the context, to the unsaid, and to what makes meaning. And people sort of forget that there's many levels of listening. And Oscar Trimboli is a very good guy on this. He does a good podcast about listening, because we give all these skills on speaking. I'm a speaker coach, and I coach CEOs to be better speakers, but few give you skills at school, in life, in listening. And it's the secret of people's gravitas, presence, and EQ. You are quite right. On to collaborative, cognitive, and cultural intelligence, CQ. Diversity, equality, inclusion. It's something that you care very much about, particularly as the firms that are hiring you and your teams want a much broader spectrum of people. What is your top tip on this area?
Okay. Really, really challenging, I think this. It's a challenging problem anyway, but it's made even more challenging by the fact that the expectations of society are continually changing and advancing. What good looks like 5 years ago is very different to what good looks like today, and it's probably going to be different again in a few years' time. I think my main tip on this is to be clear as an organization in terms of what you want to achieve, realistic at the same time in terms of your various sort of diversity and quality goals, to be communicative in those goals. So make sure that you're clearly telling your people where you want to be, communicative in terms of the actions that you're taking. And I think the one thing that's worked for us is to just to be pretty candid and honest with people about it, not just when things are going well, but when they're going less well. Because if I look at us in organization in terms of our how we do against our various diversity goals and how objectively diverse an organization we are, there are some ways in which we do really well, and there's others where we're just way behind where we should be. And I think the key thing there is you just need to communicate that that's how you're feeling, that yeah, we're proud of achieving A, but we're still well aware that we have done a really bad job on B. If you're candid with it, if you don't try and sort of cover it up with sort of selling to your people in any way, and I think if you just, and this, it comes back down to, I guess, authentic leadership in a lot of ways, but if you can get across the fact that you clearly care about this, you're clearly working hard to improve, we just need time, we just need patience, then I think generally people will be pretty they'll respect that.
Yeah.
That goes, no, I don't think people are necessarily expecting to work for an organization that is perfectly diverse at all times out of the box. They want to be an organization that cares a lot about it and is doing what they can to improve.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, very, very tough field. I don't think, to be honest, having had lots of conversations with lots of different people about this topic, as the topic has become more and more high profile over the last few years, no one really, I don't think anyone really has the answer.
No. And in
yeah.
fact, I was with a client the other day. Lee and I were facilitating an event with 160 staff in London, and they had an expert, whatever that means, in diversity, equality, and inclusion. And their big statement was, well, we all, unconscious bias, we are all suffering from bias. We all have our biases. Well, of course you do, because it's your upbringing and the way you see the world. We see the world not as the world is, but the way we are. So I think recognizing that we do have a bias and trying to get other perspectives helps. Resilience next, Jamie. You, as you set things up on your own, and you had those highs and those lows, you've had to be very resilient. And how have you picked yourself up in times of adversity? You seemed a very disciplined, a very driven person. But when things don't work out for you, you're keen on learning from it and moving on. But what's your tip?
Yeah, so this is probably the only other. So I mentioned I was kind of good from day one at emotional intelligence. I think resilience was my other sort of day one superpower, and that's it. Everything else I was pretty sort of bang average at. In fact, I had a nickname at my old company, the Iceman, because I'd never really get too flapped one way or another. I think probably a good chunk of that is genetic, as in you to an extent you are who you are. But I think a lot of it also comes down to the way that I think about things. So when something goes wrong, so let me if I give you an example, let's say we're working on a big deal as a business, and we're working on it for multiple months, and it's going to have a huge impact to everyone involved. And in the last minute, it falls apart, and it falls apart for a reason that was effectively nigh on impossible to have predicted, and very, very difficult to have come out with another result. I will, the way my mind works is I will analyze what exactly happened with that deal, establish why it fell apart, and what we could have conceivably done different to have fixed it. And I will always find something. Now, I might find something that's absolutely tiny, and it's completely unreasonable to have expected us to have foreseen it. And I might find something that actually, if we'd have done it differently, it maybe would have only had like a 1% impact on the chances of a successful result. But I will always find something. And then in finding that allows me to take complete accountability for what happened. So the reason why that deal fell apart, it wasn't bad luck. It wasn't because the universe was against me. It was because I didn't do good enough. I have control of it. And I think it ticks two boxes that help with resilience. The first box is control, as in, no, I do control my life and I do control these outcomes, which I find is a lot more motivating than just thinking it's all down to good or bad fortune. And secondly, it ticks the box of personal development of, well, this happened, I've learned lessons from it. So it's not necessarily a completely bad thing. There are positives I've taken from it as well, which diminishes the setback. Now, it doesn't work for everyone. I think there's some people that if they had that mindset, it ends up in a fairly dark place where they're taking accountability for absolutely everything, and they ends up having an impact on their self-esteem. But for me, it works really well, and it works universally in business. It doesn't necessarily work in life generally. Like, there are things that can go wrong in your life that that's not a helpful approach to take. You know, if you've got, I don't know, a health issue or something like that, it's not applicable. But in business, in my experience, it's applicable to pretty much, dare I say it, everything. Definitely
Yeah.
most things it's applicable. You can find something that's a learn and also something that you could have done differently. And for me, it's bringing that ownership to yourself, taking accountability, and then moving on.
Yeah, lovely. Next to our brand and then legacy, and then we talk executive team's favorite book and a top tip. Very briefly, brand. You're about to learn what people say about you when you're not in the room. We're going to do a 360, you and I. But what is the one thing you're expecting to come out in the 360 as an area that you know people are going to say you could improve?
Approachability.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've done lots of 360s before. It's always there, and it's been there for years. I think part of it is there because of, you know, I do a fairly big job and I'm sitting at a fairly senior level, and to a certain extent it comes with the territory, but there's definitely, and like on some approach, when I say approachability, I mean specifically approachability with criticism, i.e. people coming to me and telling me that they don't agree with the decision I've made, or, you know, they think I could have done something a slightly better way or something like that. I think, you know, that will be on there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll look forward to that, Jamie. Legacy. What would you like on your gravestone as your legacy in your work and in your personal life with your daughters and your partner?
So I think personal life, it's just a happy, non-dysfunctional family left behind. And I think a happy family doesn't necessarily correlate always with business success. I think it's something that needs to be worked at very hard. So that's kind of all I want on the personal side. On the business side, a legacy of actually having made a lot of people around me very successful and into multimillionaires. You know, it's what we try and do in the organization here. We try and offer that path so that people can, that, you know, it's completely open-ended and people can achieve anything they want to achieve. And I'd love to be in a position, you know, where I can point to a number of people, and they're also, when they're tracking back their ultimate success they've had in life, they're tracking it back to that moment where they first met me and decided to join this organization and go on that journey.
And what was the Lamborghini like? Did you enjoy it once you bought it?
It was really cool, but I didn't really end up driving it very much. So I had to sell it after six months. So it was good. It was good to scratch the itch, but yeah, probably underused that one a bit.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, executive teams. You know, you're in the business of hiring people, pulling teams together. In your own experience, in your own business, what have you done when you've got a toxic team, it's gone slightly bad, and you need to make it a high-performing team? If there was one tip, we haven't got very long, what would be your top tip about turning a team around?
Okay, so for a toxic team, I mean, I'm really thinking about sort of toxic people, specifically a toxic leader. I think you just need to have a very candid conversation with them so they're left in completely clear terms what your view is of what they're doing and how they can go about remedying it. And then you need to set a very tight time frame in which you need to see change. And then if you don't see substantive change, then you need to basically move on. Like I've developed lots of people, lots of teams over the years, and success rate in turning an underperformer into a good performer is very high. Success rate in turning a toxic individual or a toxic team into a non-toxic individual or non-toxic team is substantially lower. I think it's very difficult, and you need to, you know, be very clear on what your expectations. Certainly give them a chance to change, and the best way of doing that is with complete candor in what your thoughts are on their behavior, and also the consequences on whether they, you know, if they continue with that. But you can't let it drag out for long. You know, I've made that mistake way too many times.
Yeah, very good. Favorite book on leadership, if you were to recommend a book or two?
I really enjoyed No Rules recently, the one out on Netflix that Reed Hastings. Sheer readability of the book is very good. Like it's a very easy read. I like their principles approach to how they treat their people. I think a lot of the stuff you couldn't necessarily lift out wholesale and apply to your organization because, Netflix have got the brand that they've got and they've effectively got an unlimited budget on a lot of these things. So it's not necessarily massively useful, but it was a good book. I think probably my favorite book over the last few years is Principles by Ray Dalio. I didn't actually massively enjoy the read. I found the read a bit dense, but in terms of the culture that he espouses there at his company, Bridgewater, and also the principles-based approach to leadership and running a business, I found very inspirational, and yeah, really useful book, that one.
Great, thanks. So Jamie, we're just at the end now. If you would kindly introduce yourself again, what your business does, and give us your 2-minute top leadership tip, please.
Hi there, my name is Jamie Woods. I'm CEO and founder of JCW Group and also CEO and founder of Search Capital. My top tip is all about the importance of self-awareness. I found in business that generally people have quite a good understanding of their strengths, but they don't necessarily have as good an understanding of their weaknesses and their liabilities. In my experience, everyone out there in business, no matter what you may have achieved, you will have some kind of substantial weakness, and that weakness can conceivably have a very negative impact on your goals and your business if left unmanaged. So my tip is to make sure you identify what those weaknesses are, whether that's through psychometric testing, anonymous 360s, full and frank conversations with the people that know you best, or even just sort of spending a lot of time reflecting on yourself. Understand what those weaknesses are and then take appropriate action, the action being to make sure the role that you're doing is structured toward your strengths and away from your weaknesses, and also that the team around you is structured accordingly, i.e. you have people in your team whose strengths counteract your weaknesses and vice versa. But I think if anyone's out there thinking that they don't have any weaknesses or their weaknesses don't pose any kind of risk to their organization, then you're probably kidding yourself and you need to find out what they are.
Brilliant. Well, Jamie Woods, thank you very much indeed for being on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. It's been an absolute honor and I wish you every success.
Thank you, Jonathan. Great to be here.